I still remember the night everything changed. The night my father stopped being my hero and became a stranger. It was late summer, the kind of night when the air feels heavy, as if it knows something terrible is about to happen. I was 16 then, too young to understand what betrayal really meant, but old enough to feel it cut deep. Our house looked perfect from the outside. Bright lights, trimmed garden, laughter spilling through the open windows. People said we were the family everyone admired. If only they knew the cracks that were already forming beneath the smiles. My mother was in the kitchen that night, humming to herself while stirring something on the stove. My little brother was on the floor, building a city out of Lego blocks. I was upstairs, half listening to music, half watching the clock. Dad was late, again. He'd been working late a lot those days. And every time Mom would say the same thing. Your dad's doing it for us. For a better future. But even then, something in her eyes didn't match her words. I remember hearing the door open downstairs, his heavy footsteps, the sound of his keys hitting the counter. Then Mom's voice, soft and uncertain. You're home late again. And his, cold, distant, unfamiliar. Can we not do this tonight? That's when I knew. It wasn't the words, it was the tone. Something had already changed. Over the next few weeks, silence filled the house like fog. He started avoiding family dinners. His phone was always face down. He smiled less. And when he did, it wasn't the same smile that used to make me feel safe. Mom tried to hold everything together. She always did. But one night, I woke up to the sound of muffled crying. I followed the noise and saw her sitting on the floor of the kitchen, phone in hand, her shoulders shaking. She didn't see me at first. But when she did, she tried to hide the screen. Too late. A woman's photo flashed for a split second before the screen went black. Someone younger, stylish, smiling in a way my mom hadn't in months. And my dad was right beside her, his arm around her waist. I remember feeling frozen. My heart didn't break all at once. It cracked slowly, piece by piece, like glass under pressure. The next morning, nothing looked different, but everything was. He acted like nothing happened. Mom pretended to believe it. And I started pretending too. Pretending that I didn't see. Pretending that my father was still a good man. Pretending that our family wasn't already collapsing. But pretense can only last so long. It was a Sunday afternoon when the truth finally exploded. He called us into the living room. No warning, no emotion, just a statement that felt rehearsed. I'm leaving. I've met someone. My mother didn't speak. Her face went pale, but her hands didn't move. My little brother started crying, asking where Dad was going. And I just stared at him, searching for any trace of guilt. There wasn't any. He said it calmly, as if it were a business decision. As if walking out on his wife and children was something you could plan in a calendar. I asked him one question. I don't even know why. Do you even love us anymore? He hesitated, just for a second. And that second said everything. Then he left. He took a suitcase, his car keys, and the version of himself we used to love. That door didn't just close behind him, it slammed shut on everything we once were. People say time heals all wounds. They're wrong. Time just teaches you how to hide the scars. The first few months were chaos. Mom tried to act strong, but I saw her collapse behind closed doors. Bills piled up. Calls went unanswered. Dad stopped visiting. Stopped calling. Stopped caring. And yet, I saw him. On social media. At restaurants. At parties, with her. The woman who replaced us. They looked happy. Picture perfect. Smiling the same fake smiles he used to wear with us. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break something. But instead, I promised myself something else. One day he'll regret it, not because I'll hurt him, but because I'll rise higher than he ever imagined. From that day on, something inside me changed. I stopped waiting for his apology. I stopped craving his attention. I started building myself instead, quietly, relentlessly. Every insult, every tear, every night I saw Mom crying, it became fuel. Fuel for something greater, something colder, something unstoppable. He left us for a better life. Fine. I'd build one so powerful that he'd have to watch from the outside, wishing he hadn't walked away. And I did. Step by step. Year by year. But I had no idea that years later, fate would bring us face to face again, not as father and daughter, but as strangers standing on opposite sides of success. And that meeting? That was the day he finally realized what betrayal really feels like. If someone had looked at us from the outside, they would have thought we had everything. A beautiful house with white curtains that danced with the morning breeze. A shiny car in the driveway. Family pictures framed perfectly on the living room wall. My dad in the center, my mom glowing beside him, and us kids smiling like we didn't have a care in the world. We were the family people pointed at and said, "That's what happiness looks like." But they didn't know happiness can be staged, just like a photograph. Behind those walls were quiet fights, tense dinners, and a mother who cried herself to sleep with the lights off. Behind that perfect home was a girl, me, learning too early that love isn't always forever. Before everything fell apart, my father was everything to me. He was the man who taught me how to ride a bike, how to throw a stone across the lake, how to keep my chin up when life got rough. When I was little, I thought there was nothing he couldn't fix. He used to tell me, "A man is only as strong as the family he protects." I believed him. I believed every word. That's why his betrayal cut so deep. Because when he walked out that door, it wasn't just a father leaving. It was the man I built my faith around. Back then, our family dinners were the picture of perfection. He'd sit at the head of the table, talking about his work, his plans, his dreams. Mom would listen, her eyes glowing with quiet pride. And I'd just sit there soaking it in, thinking that one day, I wanted a love just like theirs. But slowly, the warmth began to fade. He stopped looking at Mom the same way. His phone became his new dinner companion. And whenever I tried to talk about my school, my art, my life, his eyes would drift somewhere else, as if my words didn't matter anymore. At first, I told myself it was stress, that maybe he was just tired. That work had changed him. But deep down, I knew. It wasn't work that made him smile when his phone buzzed. It wasn't work that made him start wearing cologne again or checking his reflection twice before leaving home. The signs were all there. We just didn't want to see them. One night, I overheard my parents fighting. Their voices low at first, then rising, breaking through the fragile peace of our home. "You're never here anymore," Mom said. "You think I don't notice? The late nights, the lies." "You're imagining things," he snapped. "You've always been too emotional." That sentence, "too emotional," became her silence. She stopped asking questions after that. I didn't know it then, but that's how betrayal grows. Quietly, in the space where truth is ignored. To everyone else, we were still perfect. We still smiled at neighborhood barbecues. Still attended school events as a happy family. Still posed for pictures like nothing was wrong. But when the guests left and the lights dimmed, we went back to our separate corners, like strangers trapped under one roof. Mom would sit by the window, staring out as if waiting for a version of him that no longer existed. I'd stay up late, pretending to do homework, but really just listening, waiting for the sound of his car pulling into the driveway. Sometimes he didn't come home at all. The night before he finally left, I walked into the living room and found him sitting alone. He looked distant. Not angry, not sad, just gone. I wanted to ask him why he stopped trying, why our family wasn't enough anymore. But I couldn't, because deep down I was terrified of the answer. So instead, I said the one thing I always said before bed, "Good night, Dad." He looked up, hesitated, and said softly, "Good night, kiddo." That was the last time I heard him say it. The next morning, his side of the closet was empty. His toothbrush gone. His car missing. He didn't even leave a note. Just silence, and the faint smell of his cologne lingering in the air, like a ghost that refused to leave. Mom didn't cry that day. She didn't yell or break anything. She just stood there, looking at the open space in the closet, whispering, "He actually did it." And I realized, sometimes, heartbreak doesn't sound like screaming. Sometimes it sounds like nothing at all. After he left, people whispered. They said things like, maybe he found someone else. Maybe they weren't happy after all. But no one ever said it to our faces, because from the outside, we still pretended. We still played the part of the strong family. I smiled at school. Mom wore her wedding ring for months after, and whenever someone asked where Dad was, we both said the same thing. He's busy with work. A lie that tasted bitter every time we spoke it. Looking back now, I see how fragile everything was. How one person's selfishness can rewrite an entire family's story. How a man can walk away thinking he's chasing happiness, only to realize years later, he was running from the only people who ever truly loved him. But back then, I didn't understand revenge. I didn't understand justice. All I knew was pain, and the quiet determination growing inside me. I didn't want to destroy him. Not yet. I wanted to become everything he thought we couldn't be without him. I wanted success to be my silence, and his regret to echo louder than any words I could ever say. And slowly, I began to build that version of myself, one piece at a time. What none of us knew then, though, was that fate wasn't done with us, because years later, after the scars had faded and I thought I'd finally moved on, life would throw us back into the same room again. Only this time, I wouldn't be the broken girl he left behind. I'd be the woman standing on top, the one with power, control, and everything he once abandoned. And when he'd look into my eyes again, he wouldn't just see his daughter. He'd see his biggest mistake. When he left, the house didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a museum of memories we couldn't bear to throw away. His jacket still hung by the door. His favorite mug still sat on the counter. But the warmth that used to fill the air was gone. Silence became our new normal, the kind that hums in the background, louder than any sound. For weeks, Mom barely spoke. She'd move around like a shadow, cooking, cleaning, pretending not to crumble inside. And me? I tried to act strong. I smiled for my little brother, told him Dad was just working somewhere far. But deep down, I knew that lie had an expiration date. Money became tight. The bills Dad used to handle now arrived with red stamps and sharp deadlines. Mom started selling her jewelry, the ones he once gave her during anniversaries that now meant nothing. I'll never forget the day I found her sitting at the table, her wedding ring placed beside a stack of unpaid bills. She looked up at me with tired eyes and said, "We'll be fine, sweetheart. I just need a little time." But even I could hear the tremble in her voice. The kind that tells you the person you rely on is breaking. So I made a silent promise that night. If he can walk away and build a new life, then so can we. I got a part-time job after school, waitressing at a small diner downtown. The hours were long and the pay was small, but it made me feel something I hadn't felt in a while: control. Each time I handed a customer their order, I told myself, "You're getting stronger." Each time I came home smelling like coffee and exhaustion, I told myself, "You're not broken anymore." Mom found work too, sewing clothes for a local boutique. Her hands, once soft, started to blister. But she never complained. We built our days around survival. Not comfort, not dreams, just survival. But somehow, in that struggle, something beautiful started to grow. Mom and I became a team. We laughed again, small, fragile laughs, but real ones. We shared dinners of cheap takeout and told stories about better times. And slowly, the emptiness he left behind began to fill. Not with him, but with strength. Still, there were moments that hurt more than others. Like when my brother asked if Dad was coming for his birthday, or when I saw him at the mall one evening, holding hands with her, the woman he left us for. He didn't see me, Or maybe he did, and pretended not to. Either way, that moment burned something permanent inside me. It wasn't just pain anymore, it was determination. I didn't want to hurt him. I wanted him to see me, to see what he gave up, to see that we didn't just survive without him. We became something stronger than he ever imagined. Years passed. Pain turned into purpose. I graduated with honors, something he never even came to see. When they called my name on stage, I scanned the audience automatically, a habit I couldn't break. Of course he wasn't there, but Mom was. Clapping, crying, proud. And that's when I realized I didn't need his approval anymore, because I had already outgrown the version of myself that once begged for it. College came next. I chose business. Ironic, considering my father was once a businessman who taught me everything about success. He said, "Money isn't power. Stability is." Now I understood. Real power was being able to stand without anyone's help. I worked part-time jobs, applied for scholarships, skipped parties, and stayed focused. Every time I felt tired, I remembered his words the night he left. "You'll understand when you're older." Well, I was older now, and I understood perfectly, not his choice, but his weakness. There's a strange kind of fire that comes from being abandoned. It doesn't burn you, it forges you. And I was becoming someone new, someone sharper, someone unshakable. People started noticing. Professors called me driven. Classmates called me cold. But they didn't know the truth. They didn't know that every decision, every late night, every success was fueled by a silent vow. One day he'll see me again, and he won't recognize who I've become. Mom's health started declining a few years later. The stress, the long hours, it all caught up with her. I spent nights by her bedside, listening to her whisper, "You're doing so well, baby. I'm proud of you." And every time she said it, my heart broke a little more, because I knew she deserved so much better than the life he left her with. When hospital bills piled up, I worked extra shifts. No help from him, no call, no message. It was as if we never existed in his story. But I didn't beg, not once. Because the daughter he left behind had learned how to survive without his love and how to live without his name. By the time I was 24, I had built something solid, a small business of my own. A marketing firm that started in my apartment with a borrowed laptop and a coffee-stained notebook. I didn't have connections, money, or a safety net. But I had discipline, the kind you earn when you've had to rebuild from ashes. And with every new client, every late-night deal, every success, I felt like I was stitching back the pieces of our family's dignity. Then one morning, I saw something that stopped me cold. An article online, his name, my father's company, the one he built after leaving us. The headline read, "Businessman faces major financial scandal, family image in crisis." His photo was right there, older, tired, but still pretending to smile. The same man who once said we weren't enough, now facing the consequences of his own choices. I didn't know whether to feel pity or satisfaction. Maybe both. Because fate has its own timing, and justice doesn't always come loud. Sometimes, it arrives in silence, through karma, through consequence, through the simple act of survival. That moment wasn't the end, it was the beginning. The start of something bigger, something that would bring him back into my life in a way neither of us expected. Because a few weeks after that article, I got a call. A familiar voice on the other end. Shaky, uncertain, regretful. "Is this my daughter?" And just like that, the past I had buried came crashing back to life. I was sitting in my office when the call came. A quiet Tuesday afternoon, sunlight streaming through tall glass windows, my team working in silence. Success used to feel like a dream. Now it felt like a normal day. My phone buzzed. a number I didn't recognize. At first, I ignored it. Spam calls were routine, but it rang again and again. 3 times. Same number. Something inside me whispered, "Answer it." I did. And the moment I heard that voice, every wall I'd built over the years trembled. "Is this my daughter?" I froze. There it was. The voice that had once been my entire world, and later my greatest wound. Older now, weaker, hesitant. "Dad?" I said, almost in disbelief. A pause, then a soft, broken sigh. "Yes, it's me. I wasn't sure you'd pick up." For a second, all the air left the room. Time folded in on itself. 16 again, watching him walk out the door. 20 again, working late nights to keep Mom's bills paid. 24, reading about his downfall in the papers. Now here he was, a ghost resurrected through a phone line. He said he needed to see me, that it was important, that things weren't going well. Part of me wanted to hang up, to remind him how it felt to be ignored when we needed him most. But curiosity, or maybe unfinished pain, made me say, "Fine, 1 hour. Public place." I gave him the address of a small cafe near my office. Neutral ground. No memories there. When I arrived, he was already sitting inside. I almost didn't recognize him. The confident man who once walked like he owned every room was gone. This man looked smaller, shoulders slumped, suit wrinkled, eyes hollow. He stood when he saw me, his lips trembling into an uncertain smile. "You look so grown up." I didn't return the smile. "Time does that," I said flatly. We sat. Silence stretched between us, thick and awkward. He stirred his coffee, though he hadn't added sugar. Old habits die hard. Finally, he spoke. "I made mistakes." I let out a quiet laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was pathetic. That's one way to describe abandoning your family. He flinched. "Good. I didn't call you here for pity," he said quickly. "I'm in trouble." Of course he was. It always comes back to that, doesn't it? He explained everything. The business collapse, the betrayal from partners he thought were loyal, the debts piling up, the new wife who had taken what was left and vanished. "She left me," he said, voice breaking. "She took everything, even the house." For a moment, I just watched him. The irony was almost poetic. The man who taught me that family is replaceable now sat across from me, replaced. "So what exactly do you want from me?" I asked. "A chance," he whispered. "To make things right. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need help." "Your company. Maybe you could—" I interrupted. "You want a job?" "Not just that. Guidance, a second chance." The words hung in the air like smoke. I leaned back, studying him. He looked desperate, tired, human. Part of me, the girl who once adored him, wanted to reach across the table to say it's okay. But another part, the woman who survived without him, refused. "You had your chances," I said quietly. "You had us. You chose to walk away." "I know." His voice cracked. "And I've paid for it every single day since." He looked at me with pleading eyes. "I just thought, maybe you'd understand. Maybe you'd let me prove myself again." I let the silence sit between us. It felt heavy, almost sacred. Then I said, "You once told me a man is only as strong as the family he protects." He nodded slowly, guilt spreading across his face. "I remember." "So tell me," I continued, voice steady, "what does that make the man who walks away from his—" He had no answer. None that could undo years of pain. I paid for my coffee and stood up. "I hope you find peace, Dad, but you won't find it through me." I turned to leave, but he grabbed my wrist. Not tight, just enough to stop me. "Please," he whispered. "Don't do this. You're all I have left." I looked down at his hand, the same hand that once held mine crossing the street, now trembling with fear and regret. "Then maybe," I said softly, "you should have thought of that before you let go." I pulled free and walked out. Outside, the air felt colder. The city lights blurred through my tears, though I wasn't sure if they were for him or for the little girl still hiding somewhere inside me. I thought that was the end of it, that he'd fade back into the past, where he belonged, but life rarely ends chapters so neatly. A week later, an envelope arrived at my office. No name, just my initials written in shaky handwriting. Inside was a photo, me and my mother years ago standing in front of our old house. And a note. I never stopped watching over you. I just didn't know how to come back. Dad. Beneath the paper was something else, a legal document, the deed to his bankrupt company. Signed over to me. For a moment, I couldn't move. It felt like fate had handed me his downfall, neatly wrapped, waiting for justice. And that's when the coldness inside me whispered, "This is it. The moment you take back everything he stole from you." I didn't need revenge in words or tears. All I needed was silence and success. Because sometimes the sweetest justice isn't destroying your enemy. It's letting them watch you win without them. That was the day the story shifted again. The day the past didn't just knock, it walked right back into my world. But this time, I wasn't a daughter seeking love. I was a woman holding the power he once thought he owned. And I was about to decide what to do with it. When the deed to his company arrived, I didn't celebrate. There was no triumphant music, no victory pose. Just a quiet moment at my desk, the city's hum below, and a stack of paperwork that smelled faintly of someone else's mistakes. I placed the papers down and closed my eyes. For years, I'd been building my own life, a small firm, loyal clients, a reputation for getting things done. Taking over his legacy wasn't about ego. It was about choice. He chose to leave us with nothing. I chose to take what responsibility he had abandoned and use it as the instrument of his regret. If revenge is an art, then planning is its greatest brush. First rule, never act from pain. Anger is loud. Strategy is quiet. I could have stormed into the industry like a hurricane and razed everything he loved. But chaos is messy, and messy looks like bitterness. What I wanted was precise, undeniable, a slow-burning truth that would leave him nowhere to hide. So I made a list. Stabilize the company. If I wanted him to feel the weight of what he'd lost, I had to make the company stronger than it had been under him. Not just afloat, better. Uncover the truth. His collapse had roots. There were partners who lied, contracts that were manipulated, and a series of decisions that looked clean on paper but reeked of greed. Knowledge is leverage. I needed every file, every email, every hidden ledger. Protect what mattered. My mother's name, our family's dignity. They were not to be used for petty displays. This was about proving a point. Abandon a family, and they'll become an immovable force. Expose quietly. Reputations crumble faster when the world sees the truth through objective evidence. I would let facts do the talking. Control the narrative. People remember the story that's told well. I would shape how this played out, not as vengeance, but as correction. The first weeks were the hardest. I had to learn parts of his business no one had taught me. I read balance sheets until the numbers blurred. I sat in meetings with lawyers and old partners, listening more than speaking. I swallowed the urge to show off, to flash my success and say, "I told you so." Instead, I earned their trust quietly. I fixed small leaks, renegotiated contracts, cut wasteful expenses, and reconnected with clients who had been left in limbo. People respect results. Results are persuasive. At night, I dug into files. The backdoors his partners used were ingenious because they assumed no one would care to look. They thought the man who abandoned his family would never return to clean the mess. They were wrong. I found emails with roundabout payments. I found shell companies funneling money to private accounts. I found signed documents with clauses that favored those who orchestrated the fall. Each discovery felt like holding a hot coal. Dangerous, but powerful. Evidence became my quiet army. I don't enjoy legal fights, but I respect a clean strategy. Lawsuits are messy, but they are also formal, public, and permanent. I hired a small team, a forensic accountant, a sharp corporate lawyer, and 2 trusted advisors from my own firm. None of them knew the story in full. I gave them facts, not drama. Facts are harder to ignore. We prepared. We built a case that would stand up under scrutiny. I scheduled meetings with regulators and journalists, not to sensationalize, but to ensure transparency. If these partners had hidden the truth in layers of deceit, we were going to peel each layer back in daylight. At every step, I controlled the pace. I released information when it mattered. Never too soon, never too late. It's a strange thing to watch a man realize his safety net has holes, and then watch as those holes are widened into chasms by the steady hand of truth. There was one part of the plan that felt almost cruel, giving him choices. He could have come forward then, admitted the mistakes, helped us correct them, shown remorse. That would have softened everything. But he didn't. Pride or fear or both kept him silent. So I made moves that would make silence impossible. I secured meetings with old clients and partners, not to gloat, but to rebuild trust. Each handshake, each contract renewed under the new leadership, was a quiet reminder that stability is not a favor. It's competence. When partners began to switch allegiance back to the company, the message landed where it needed to. His decision cost him not only family, but legacy. My mother's name was never used in boardrooms or press releases. This was not a personal vendetta to humiliate him in the public square. It was about the principle: abandon responsibilities, and the world will reassess you on the merits you once took for granted. The media piece was the final stroke, but not the first. We'd built the case, secured settlements where we could, and opened formal investigations into the fraudulent partners. The journalists I worked with didn't want to run a revenge story. They wanted facts, accountability, corporate malfeasance. That's what we gave them. Airtight documentation and a narrative that fit the public interest. When the article went live, it wasn't sensational. It was sharp, professional, and damning in the most clinical way possible. No melodrama, just a clear trail of mismanagement and deliberate deceit. The names of those who'd hidden behind the company were listed. The networks of shell entities were mapped. The firm he once used to lift himself up was now the instrument that exposed the people who had exploited it. He read it. I saw it happen. Not in person, but through the tremor in his voice when he called, yet again, to try to bargain. "You're ruining me," he said, a plea wrapped in anger. I listened, not with the raw ache of the girl he'd left, but with the cool clarity of the woman who had designed the entire plan. "I'm restoring what you broke," I replied. "You made choices. This is consequence. Maybe that will teach you the weight of what you abandoned." He tried to argue ethics. I handed him evidence. He tried to beg. I offered restitution, on 2 conditions: public accountability and commitment to make amends in a way that benefited those he harmed economically. Pride again prevented him from accepting the terms. Revenge had never been about his suffering alone. It was about aligning cause and effect. Choices have consequences. The people who had been hurt by his and his partner's actions deserved to see fairness served. That truth steadied me in moments when old wounds wanted to scream. Months passed. Lawsuits settled. Some partners were indicted. The company, under new stewardship, stabilized and began to attract investors who trusted the transparency we'd enforced. My marketing firm's reputation grew alongside the revival. Clients respected the quiet ruthlessness that paired competence with integrity. And through it all, the man who taught me to stand strong watched from the sidelines as his world reassembled without him. There was one moment I'll never forget. He came to my office, not as a man asking for guidance this time, but as someone reduced to watching. We didn't exchange many words. He stood at the glass, looking small against the skyline we used to dream beneath. He looked at me differently then, not with the dismissive half-smile of a father who knows he can order obedience, but with a kind of raw regret that has no words. He searched my face as if trying to find the child who once needed him. Instead, he found a woman he had taught to be resilient. He found the result of his own abandonment. That was the quiet victory. Not a shout, not a spectacle, but the undeniable fact that I had turned what he discarded into strength. He had run from responsibility. I had turned responsibility into results. That balance hurt him more than any public humiliation ever could. It happened on a night I hadn't planned for. No headlines. No announcement. Just one of those evenings when the air feels heavy with something waiting to happen. We were hosting a charity gala, an annual event my company sponsored to raise funds for single mothers rebuilding their lives. It was an initiative close to my heart, though few people knew why. The hall glowed in soft gold. Gentle music drifted through crystal chandeliers. The crowd was full of faces I'd once only seen from a distance. CEOs, journalists, politicians, donors. Success surrounded me like perfume. Subtle, earned, dignified. And then he walked in. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks. But no, it was him. My father. Older, smaller, wearing a suit that had clearly seen better years. He stood at the edge of the crowd, uncertain, scanning the room like a ghost searching for an invitation to belong. My chest tightened. Not from anger, that part of me had long burned out, but from something quieter. Pity, maybe, or recognition of how far I'd come. He hadn't been invited, but I didn't stop security. Let him see, I thought. Let him witness the life I built from the ashes he left behind. I was standing near the stage when our eyes met. It was strange. For years I had imagined this moment. I had rehearsed the speech I would give, the things I would say to make him understand what he had done. But when the moment came, words didn't matter. Silence did, because silence was full of everything he needed to know. He walked toward me slowly. The crowd didn't notice, too caught up in their polite conversations, their laughter. But I saw the way his gaze swept across the banners, the photos on display, pictures of women who had turned suffering into success. He stopped a few feet away from me. "You did all this?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "Yes." "You've built something incredible," he whispered. "I'm proud of you." There was that word again, proud. A word that once used to mean everything to me. Now it felt weightless. "You don't get to be proud," I said softly. "You weren't there when it mattered." He swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. I know I failed you." "You didn't just fail me," I said, my voice steady. "You failed her. You failed everything you once stood for." He looked down. The years of regret hung from his shoulders like an invisible chain. "I thought I could fix it," he murmured. But I was too late. "You can't fix what you walked away from," I said. "You can only watch what it becomes without you." The host called my name from the stage. It was time for my speech. I turned toward the microphone, but my voice, my real voice, came from somewhere deeper than words. I began to speak about resilience, about the cost of silence, about how strength isn't born from comfort, but from the cracks left by betrayal. As I spoke, I could see him in the corner of my eye, standing at the back of the hall, hands trembling, eyes glistening. "There are people in this world," I said into the microphone, "who teach you by loving you. And then there are those who teach you by leaving you. Either way, they build you." The room went quiet. It wasn't planned. It wasn't even part of my notes. But in that moment, I felt the entire story, my story, complete itself. I looked directly at him when I said my final words. Sometimes the greatest justice isn't revenge. It's becoming everything they said you couldn't. The applause erupted, thunderous, endless. People stood, clapping, smiling, inspired, unaware that the person I was truly speaking to was standing in silence at the edge of the room, drowning in the sound of what he had lost. After the event, as guests began to leave, I stepped outside for a moment of quiet. The night was cool, the city humming softly below the terrace. And there he was, waiting. "You were incredible," he said. I didn't respond. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that once built everything and lost it all. "You remind me of your mother," he said, voice breaking. "She had that same fire." "She earned it the hard way," I said. He nodded. "I wish I could go back. Do it all differently." I studied his face, the lines, the guilt, the exhaustion. For the first time, I saw not a villain, but a man who had destroyed himself long before life punished him. "You can't go back," I said gently. "But you can still learn to live with what you've done." He looked at me, eyes full of something fragile. Hope, maybe. "Do you forgive me?" That word hit like a storm. Forgiveness. I took a deep breath. "No," I said quietly. "But I don't hate you anymore." He closed his eyes and a single tear slid down his cheek. "That's more mercy than I deserve." I turned to leave, but before I could, he said one last thing, almost a whisper. "You know, when I left, I thought I was chasing happiness. But tonight I finally saw it. It just wasn't mine." He smiled sadly. And for the first time in years, I saw peace on his face. The peace that comes when truth finally settles where denial used to live. That night, as I drove home, I didn't feel anger. I didn't even feel triumph. Just an unfamiliar stillness. Because revenge had never been about destroying him. It was about reclaiming myself. And now I didn't need him to hurt anymore. His regret was its own justice. He finally saw what he had lost. Not money, not reputation, but the daughter who no longer needed his approval to stand tall. And that realization, that was the end of the revenge, and the beginning of freedom. I thought that was the end of our story. He had seen me rise. He had felt the silence that years of absence had built, and for the first time in my life, I walked away without looking back. But life has a cruel way of writing its final chapters in ink you can't see right away. Sometimes the true ending doesn't come when the curtain falls. It comes quietly, in the mail, or in the words of a stranger. 2 weeks after that night, my assistant walked into my office holding an envelope. "This was delivered by hand," she said. No sender's name. It was plain, cream-colored, sealed neatly. The handwriting on the front stopped me cold. I'd know it anywhere. My father's. I didn't open it right away. I stared at it for hours. Through one meeting, 2 client calls, and a quiet lunch I barely touched. It felt final. Like something left behind by someone who had already decided to vanish. When I finally gathered the courage, I locked my office door and opened it. Inside was a letter, written on lined paper, folded carefully, no fancy stationery. Just raw words. It began simply, "My dearest daughter, if you're reading this, it means I've already gone." My throat tightened. I don't know how to start an apology that's 30 years late. I've said sorry before, but never like this. Never when I truly meant it. I know you think I came to you for help, and maybe at first I did. But when I saw you that day sitting across from me, I realized something I never expected to. You became everything I once dreamed I'd be. Strong, wise, respected. You built your empire on integrity, the very thing I lost chasing illusions. I paused, tears blurring the words. He continued. "The company? I didn't sign it over to you as a burden. I signed it over because I wanted to give you what I could never give before. The power to choose. You see, the business wasn't just failing because of greed. There was something deeper. Something hidden." My heart skipped. I turned the page. Years ago, before everything fell apart, I discovered a fund. Money set aside for future expansions. I never touched it. When I left, I didn't take it with me. I couldn't. It was under your mother's name. I froze. My mother had died 5 years ago. She had never mentioned a fund. "It's been dormant all this time," the letter continued. "And now, legally, it belongs to you. The documents are enclosed. I didn't want that money to vanish with me. I wanted it to find its way back home, to the daughter who turned pain into power without asking anyone for permission." There was a smaller envelope tucked behind the letter. Documents, sealed, verified, legitimate. The amount? I could barely process. It wasn't millions, but enough to rebuild lives, fund dreams, and sustain every charity I had started for years to come. And yet, that wasn't what broke me. It was the last paragraph. "You once asked me what makes a man who walks away from his family. I didn't answer because I didn't know. Now I do. It's fear. The kind that eats away at love until you confuse it with failure. I was afraid of not being enough, of being seen as weak. So I built a new life to prove I was strong, and in doing so, I destroyed everything that truly mattered. Don't let fear ever decide for you the way it did for me. And if, in another life, I get to start over, I hope I meet you not as a father trying to fix the past, but as a man proud to stand beside the woman his daughter became. There was no signature at the end, just a line written in small, shaky letters. I'll be watching the sunrise, finally without running from it. I sat there for what felt like hours, the paper trembling in my hands. The anger I thought had died long ago returned, not sharp and fiery, but hollow, aching. How do you hate someone who's already punished himself every day since he left? I had built my revenge around the idea that he'd never change, that he'd never understand. But here he was, proving me wrong in the only way that mattered. He hadn't just left me with guilt. He'd left me with truth. A week later, I got the call. He had passed away quietly in his sleep. A small apartment, a modest neighborhood, nothing extravagant. No one around him, no family nearby. But there was peace. According to the landlord, he'd spent his last months reading, writing letters, and volunteering at a community center for struggling families. It broke me, because for all my strength, all my success, I never imagined he'd find redemption in silence, not through power or money, but through giving back what he'd taken. I visited that center a few days later. One of the volunteers recognized his photo when I asked. "Oh, him?" she said with a warm smile. He was quiet but kind. Always helped the kids with their homework. Said he once made mistakes he couldn't fix, so he wanted to help someone else not repeat them. I thanked her, but I couldn't speak. I just stood there, surrounded by laughter, crayons, and children running through narrow halls, and realized that maybe this was his final act of justice. Not grand, not cinematic, but human. That night I sat at my desk again with the letter beside me. The city lights shimmered outside, reflected on the glass like 1,000 tiny memories. For years I thought power came from proving people wrong. Now I knew. It came from forgiving what they couldn't make right. I took the documents he'd left and signed the fund over to the charity. Every cent would go to women rebuilding their lives, children getting another chance, families that still had a shot at staying whole. And when I finished the paperwork, I whispered the words I'd never been able to say before. I forgive you. It didn't erase the past. It didn't make the pain disappear. But it made space, for peace, for understanding, for something resembling closure. A few days later, as dawn broke, I drove to the hill outside the city, a place he and I used to visit when I was little. We used to call it the edge of tomorrow. We'd sit there watching the sunrise, and he'd tell me, "Every morning is a restart, kiddo. You just have to be brave enough to open your eyes." I stood there alone, letter in hand, as the sky turned gold. And for the first time since childhood, I felt that same warmth. It wasn't forgiveness alone. It was understanding. It was the realization that sometimes people destroy what they love, not out of hatred, but out of fear of not deserving it. I smiled through tears and whispered into the wind, "You were wrong, Dad. You did give me something. You gave me a reason to become who I am." The wind carried the words away, and the sunrise spilled over the city, soft, golden, endless. It felt like he was there, not as a shadow of regret, but as light finally learning how to stay. Because in the end, what he left behind wasn't money or a company. It was a truth I'd been too angry to see. Sometimes the person who hurt you the most also gives you the strength to heal. And that's the kind of justice that doesn't need revenge. It needs only peace. There's a strange silence that comes after revenge ends. It's not the roar of victory you imagine. It's quiet, like the ocean after a storm, calm but forever changed. I thought revenge would set me free. I thought watching him face his consequences would heal the years of abandonment and betrayal. But when the storm settled, I realized freedom wasn't something you win. It's something you learn to live in. The weeks after his death were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, condolences from people who didn't know half the story. But in between all that, something inside me began to shift. The anger that had powered me for years, it started to dissolve. For so long, I'd built my life on justice. My kind of justice. An eye for an eye. Pain for pain. But justice without forgiveness is just another form of imprisonment. And I had been my own prisoner far too long. One evening, I visited his grave. There wasn't much there. Just a simple headstone, his name etched in gray, a small vase of wildflowers left by someone else. Maybe one of those children he used to help. I knelt down and placed the letter beside the flowers. For the first time, I didn't cry. I just breathed. "You finally stopped running," I whispered. And I guess, so did I. The sunset painted the sky in amber and gold, colors he used to call the shades of forgiveness. I didn't understand it back then. Now I did. Forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about letting yourself stop drowning in what they did. That night, I went back home and sat by my window, watching the city lights flicker like constellations of broken dreams and new beginnings. I thought about every moment that had led here, the betrayals, the heartbreak, the long nights rebuilding my life from ashes. And I realized something profound. Every scar had taught me something survival never could. Strength without empathy is cruelty. Power without forgiveness is poison. And justice without peace isn't justice at all. A few days later, I met with the board of the company, the empire he once built and I had rebuilt from ruin. They expected me to expand it again, invest, double profits, grow faster. But I had a different plan. I told them the company would shift its focus, not on domination, but on restoration. We would fund education, shelters, and programs for women and families rebuilding after betrayal, loss, and financial ruin. Because pain can destroy, or it can transform. And I was done letting mine destroy. Some of them didn't agree. They wanted numbers, not meaning. But I smiled. Because this time I didn't need anyone's approval. I was finally free from the need to prove myself. Months passed. The world moved on, as it always does. But something inside me stayed still, in the best possible way. The stillness of peace, the kind that comes after you've forgiven not just others, but also the parts of yourself that once burned for revenge. I began writing again, not business plans or statements, but stories. Stories about broken families finding healing, about daughters forgiving fathers, about how love and betrayal are sometimes two sides of the same mirror. People started reading them. Some even wrote back. They said my words helped them forgive someone too. And in those letters, I found pieces of my own healing reflected back at me. One night, as I was locking up the office, one of the janitors stopped me. An older man, quiet, polite. He said, "You remind me of someone I used to know. She went through hell but came out stronger." I smiled. Maybe I did too. He nodded slowly. "Then you know. Real strength isn't in fighting back. It's in letting go." That simple sentence hit me harder than any sermon or therapy session ever could. Because that was it. That was the essence of everything I had learned. Justice had given me closure. Forgiveness had given me peace. But letting go, that was freedom. I still think of him sometimes. Not with hate. Not even with sorrow. Just gratitude. He broke me once. But in breaking me, he gave me a reason to rebuild stronger. He gave me a story worth telling. Not about revenge, but about redemption. And every time the sun rises, soft and golden, like the one he promised to watch, I whisper, "I'm okay now." Because I am. Finally, justice. He paid for what he did, not in prison, but in regret. And that's sometimes the harshest sentence of all. Forgiveness. I found it not because he earned it, but because I deserved peace. Freedom. The day I stopped being my father's daughter in pain and started being my own woman in power, that was the day I became free. As the credits of my life's darkest chapter roll quietly into the distance, I understand one last truth. Some stories aren't about punishing the people who broke you. They're about proving that love, even shattered and scarred, can still rebuild something sacred out of ruins. Because sometimes justice isn't the loud kind. It's silent. It's personal. It's the kind that lives inside your heart when you finally stop fighting ghosts and start living again.